So we're going to bake some bread again. Now we're going to do another speciality bread this time. I've not made this one before. This one is a blue cheese and walnut loaf. We're going to use some crushed walnuts or chopped up walnuts, and we're going to use some Dolcelatte. I think it is, I don't know, something like that. But it's quite a creamy cheese. Okay, now it's a wholemeal loaf, so I've got some wholemeal flour and also ordered blonde flour, bread flour. And then the only other ingredients, obviously some yeast, some salt and some black treacle. So I've weighed out my wholemeal flour, okay. I've got 400 grams in there, okay, and I've weighed out my plain bread flour. I've got 100 grams of that. Now I've got 300 mils of warm water, and I'm going to add a tablespoon of black treacle. Now there's quite a lot there, simply because a lot of that will end up staying on the spoon, okay. So I'm just going to try and get that in there, dissolved into there, and that will be the sugar element, okay. Now you don't have to have the black treacle. You could use sugar, okay, but we're gonna add that, and I'm just gonna make sure much of that as possible dissolves in there, and then we'll add the yeast. So my dark treacle and black treacle is in the water. I've added a sachet of yeast, and we're just going to let that go for 5–10 minutes, get the yeast going. So in the meantime, we're going to chop up these walnuts. Now you could blitz it in a food processor if you want, but it's just as easy just to chop them. And depending on how sort of nutty you want your loaf, it depends on how fine you want to chop it. You just don't want to chop it too fine, but on the other hand, you might not necessarily want it too lumpy. So you can chop that up, okay, and when I'm happy with that, we'll start assembling all the flours and everything. So I've chopped my walnuts. They're now going to go in with that flour, okay, and we're also going to put in there the bread flour, okay, in that goes. So just going to get the rest of them nuts in, and then we'll put the rest together. So I'm now just going to add that teaspoon of salt, and we're just going to give these a good mix through before we add the cheese. Now the cheese is a very soft, creamy cheese, okay, but we will need to try and break that up a bit, and then we'll just rub them pieces of cheese into this mixture until that is evenly mixed as possible, and then by then we should be ready to start adding our yeast water. So I've put the cheese in there, and now what I'm going to attempt to do is obviously just use my fingers, break that cheese up and try and blend it in as much as possible at this stage before we start adding the yeast water. And you can see, I don't know how well you can see there, the yeast is already activated and it's starting to bubble up a little bit. So those molasses. So I'm just going to make sure all that cheese, where possible, is distributed as much as possible, and then we'll get the dough on the go. Alright, so now we're going to add in that water and the yeast. Like I say, I added a little bit extra molasses because I knew ultimately some of that wasn't going to dissolve up properly and come off. Just getting the yeast that's on that spoon off. And now all we're going to do is we're now just obviously going to mix that all in to form up our dough. Okay, I've kept my flour out. I don't need the wholemeal one, but I should need some of the plain bread flour obviously for when we come to do the kneading. But for now, just need to get this all knocked up into a dough. So, got the dough out, and now it's a matter of just giving it a good knead together, okay, for 10 minutes, okay. It's the nuts in there, you can feel it, the texture. It's going to be a very textured bread, this, okay, very strong flavoured. So I'm just going to get this kneading, okay, and then like any other bread, we will then put it in the bowl and we will let it rise for up to an hour, okay. So let me get kneading. So that's a 10-minute knead. I'm going to put it back in that bowl, cover it over, and then, like I say, we're going to leave it for up to an hour until it's doubled in size, okay. And so at this point, go away and have a coffee. So that's the dough. It took well over an hour actually to double up in size. So what I'm going to do now is just give it another little knead for a couple of minutes, okay, just to knock it back down. I've got a baking tray which I've floured, okay, and we're going to do the loaf on that baking tray, but we're going to braid it. So I'm just going to continue kneading this for a few minutes, and then we'll get on with the braiding. Okay, so you could, if you want, just do it into a loaf shape, a round shape, whatever you want, but what we're going to do is we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to braid it. So the first thing is we're going to divide it into 3. 1, 2, 3. Now we take each piece and we're going to roll a long sausage shape, about a foot long. Okay, so we'll get all 3 rolled out, ready to braid. Right, so it's quite springy. Okay, but we start laying them alongside each other and just cut the ends over, and then we start taking the side nearest me into the middle, and then the side furthest away from me into the middle, and we just keep going like that until we get to the end, and then we just pinch the ends together. Okay. Now there's our braid done. So I'm going to transfer it onto my floured tray. Make sure the ends are sealed together, and then we're just going to cover that over, and we're now going to just let that rise for about 30 to 40 minutes. Okay. Okay, so the oven's preheated, it's up to temperature 220, and there is our risen loaf. It's risen quite a lot this time. It took ages to rise at the first knead. This time it's risen a lot, so that's now going to go in the oven, and we're going to put it on for about 25 to 30 minutes, but I'll check it at 20 because now what my oven's like. There we go. Right, so that's at just over 20 minutes, and I'm pretty sure it's going to be done. So, let's whip this out. It's very dark though. Remember, that's a lot of that is to do with that white treacle that's in it, which gives it out of the oven. So let's have a. Okay. Just going to be a bit more careful because underneath I noticed the braid isn't quite so stuck together as it is on the top. But there you have your blue cheese and walnut loaf. We'll let it cool a little bit and we might taste it. It's going to be sort of like a little bit bitty when we cut it up because I notice some of these braids are separating, but at the moment, so we'll perhaps try a little bit once it's cooled. Okay, let's try a slice of this bread. Just take this end bit off. There you go, there's the texture. See the nuts in it, still warm. Taste that blue cheese coming through. So, there you have the blue cheese and walnut loaf, and that would be nice with cheese, or just on its own, a bit like that. Excellent.